Good morning, everybody. My name is Sarah Bryden. I am the District 5 representative on the Board of Education here in Portland, Maine. I'm also the chair of the Finance, Operations, and Personnel Committee. And it is 8 o'clock on the nose on this wonderful March 15th, 2023. And we are starting our budget review meeting to discuss the co-interim superintendent's proposed budget that we all learned about yesterday in a special board meeting. I want to start by giving a quick summary of the context specific to what was shared in a city council workshop earlier this week as well. Generally speaking, to summarize, the situation is very difficult in terms of a reduction in state funding related to an increase in valuation of property across the city. And so we are on the school side and the city side, we're going to be dealing with a lot of difficult decisions. So I want to put that out there to begin. From there, we're going to move into a discussion of what we learned last night. So I see that we have, we have all of the committee members here. So the members of the Finance, Operations, and Personnel Committee, myself, Vice Chair Member Opperman, Member Youssef, and Member Figdor are all here. For the sake of anybody who might not be looking at the Brady Bunch screen, we also have Board Chair Lentz with us today. We also have Board Member Grant. And we have a number of wonderful people from our staff as well. I see co-interim superintendents Townsend and Nally. I see Gail Cressy. I see Miranda Fasulo. Now it's romper room. Okay, so let's get started in terms of a conversation. What I'd like to do is I'd like to start with initial gut reactions. I'm going to go board member by board member, starting with committee members, and give everybody an opportunity to voice what they saw last night that they were pleased to see, what they have concerns about, what they want to flag for additional conversation. And we'll give everybody an opportunity to do that. And then we will see, maybe some themes might come out of that for additional discussion. And we will see where we are at that point and continue the conversation. Any questions at this point before we get started?
I have my hand up,
okay.
So I'll jump in.
Oh, I'm sorry. It's right by the white trim of your the door jamb, so I didn't see it. So go ahead.
I'm just wondering, what the agenda for today is. How are we structuring the meeting? Is there an additional presentation, or it's board members' responses and then specific questions based on the theme of the responses, or how? How are we?
Yeah, because the turnaround is so quick, because we just got the information last night. The structure is what I just described. So going board member by board member to get initial reactions, preliminary questions, and see how much of that we can get through today. And then see what we might need to roll into a subsequent conversation. Does that help? Okay, super. Co-interim Superintendent Nally, do you have a question? I
was just going to, elaborate just in terms of past years to Member Bryden's point about the quick turnaround. I would imagine at the next committee meeting, we might come back with materials based on the questions posed today, but obviously there was no time for any preparation from what you're thinking between last night and this morning. So I would imagine the next one feels more like other finance committee meetings around the budget, where we have a little bit of time to prepare based on our understanding of where you all are at.
That's really helpful. Thank you so much. Okay. So board member Opperman, can we start with you? You are on mute.
I know. I slid things around so I could look at two things at once, and the little thing disappeared. A couple things. I really appreciated the detail of the report. As you know, I always am looking for what's there, what isn't and isn't. And I appreciated the attempt to cut back some, and the intent of keeping the academics and the equity all moving forward. I had a couple concerns, and in general concerns, and one is in looking at, and I've said this before, class size relative to the elementary and middle school classes, and not having enough ed techs or social workers in those places to support, because I went and I've noted some class sizes that are close to or over 20 in elementary, and I think that is in a normal class situation, a pre 20 years ago was acceptable if a little high, and today with all of the situations and students of great need, that I think we need to start thinking like social workers do, where as you have more intense needs, you have smaller class sizes. And the same with the middle school, because I think student behavior and attention is directly related to their needs being met. And so I think in the middle school, I've heard many discussions of things outside of our community, and that I think some of that would be just by having each student having a bit more attention. And that's one way. I've got other things, but I'll leave it at that.
Thank you, Board Member Opperman. Board Member Youssef, can we turn to you next to get your initial thoughts, concerns, what you liked, what you want to talk more about?
Can you skip to someone else? I'm still getting my coffee.
Sure thing, absolutely. We'll come back to you. Board Member Figdor, go ahead.
I guess at this point, I'll just state my two biggest concerns, and maybe I should start by just saying thank you to our co-interim superintendents. I know this was an incredibly challenging budget to put together under very, probably the most inauspicious circumstances. So I just appreciate how strong this budget document is, and all of the work that went into figuring out how to move our district forward and staying true to the Portland Promise while being, kind of a frog in boiling water in terms of the difficulty of the financial situation, in terms of the overall environment, with inflation continuing to be so high, and the continued loss of state funding. Overall, I think this is a very solid start. I guess the two things that kind of jumped out at me were, one, I would love clarity and want to better understand what I see as a lack of adding finance department positions, responding to all of the needs that were identified in the payroll crisis and as a part of this big loss work. And so I want to fully understand. I see that we're adding HR positions, but I don't see, I guess I'm not clear on why we didn't prioritize adding finance positions. So that would be my first concern. And then my second is just understanding and thinking through the cliff that we're setting up for FY25, and trying to understand the implications of moving so much of our core staffing onto ESSER funds, and just understanding how that sets us up for next year, and whether, in fact, we are being responsible as a board in terms of thinking ahead and figuring out how to sustain the work that we know is so crucial. So those are the two very top level concerns that I will raise at this point.
Thank you, Board Member Figdor. So I'll go next in terms of capturing the thoughts from members of the committee. a starting point. So I also want to thank you so much for all the hard work that that went into this document. I also appreciate not only the effort, but the level of detail, so that we can do the work of moving forward and arriving at a final product. I want to also just be very clear, hopefully it was already clear, but just to make it extra clear that, at least from my perspective, when I ask questions, it's not to challenge. I want to understand. And so I'm asking questions from that place of curiosity rather than challenge. And so to sort of link up a little bit with what Board Member Figdor was just saying about the CLIF and use of ESSER funding, I'd like to better understand. I get the sense very, very clearly, and thank you for explaining this, that you sort of took all the ESSER investments, put them on the table, and sort of decided what can be continued and what can't, and moved some things over into ESSER funding to allow them to continue. I'm curious about whether there was a review of local budget items and an analysis of what within the local budget continues and does not continue at the same level. And I say that because, if we are talking about, the use of ESSER funding as a potential way to sort of increase or make more severe this cliff, that to me implies maybe that once something's in the local budget, we don't look at it again in terms of whether it continues or not. I'm not saying that's the case, but I wanted to sort of make sure that we flag that and potentially have a conversation about that. I share Board Member Opperman's positive opinion of investing in making sure class sizes at the elementary level are where they need to be for kids to be successful. I was really, really pleased to see that as a line item in the document last night, that there's 7 individual people that are strategically being used to keep class sizes where they are. I'd like to see a discussion about where those class sizes are. Are they where they need to be? That sort of thing. Those are my high level thoughts at this point. Board Member Youssef, are you prepared to share some thoughts, or would you like me to come back to you after folks who are not on the committee have had a chance?
No, I'm fine. I can share whatever I have here. Thank you so much, Chair. And thank you, Co-Superintendent and the team for incredible work. And this seems, as member Emily Figdor mentioned, is a solid start, and I really appreciate the work that into. One thing I share with Dr. Oberman is the not sufficient social work in the area that we have mentioned, and I'm so enthusiastic that we see the adding social work, multilingual case management additional. That's really looking into the newcomers and how we will have to adjust our resources for the new students that are coming. I don't see enough satisfaction to be carried. The reduction that we will do the mentoring coordinators. I would like to see more mentor coordinators in the coming budget. That's all I will say now. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And it looks like Vice Chair Bondo has joined us. Good morning. I appreciate you being here with us, and I see you have a question. Go ahead.
Thank you so much, Member Biden. Thank you for the presentation yesterday for the budget. So I have a couple of clarification. My main question here that I really highlight, I heard and Member Victor just spoke about it. I mean, a lot of cuts, then we have to move some FTs and some of the fund back to the ESSER. So my concern was just what she raised about, so what's going to happen for the couple of years, because when I look at what we putting under the ESSER is like, the Making Happen program, and I think the secondary design team, then we just want to see moving forward. So when I look at the Making Happen, I just want to make sure that this something that we brought back to the local budget a couple of years ago, and we are bringing them back to the ESSER. So I just want to understand how we come on that and what's going to happen in a couple of years with those positions that we try to fund under the ESSER. And the other one is just try to understand what kind of evaluation we have done to have those positions cut, like the coordinators, the community coordinators. I saw 3 FDs, and I just want to understand where are they, which school they are serving, and why are we coming to the possibility to cut those positions while we have them in the first place. I mean, if we have 3 of them, I mean, they have a meaningful power or something really meaningful that they're doing for the school district. So I just wonder, those 3 FDs, which school they really represent, and why are we cutting them for? So those are my 2 highlights. The third one is just a little more on the core services compared to the baseline expenditures. I just want to go a little more deeper on the core services, like the special ed, education, the tuition. So those are my 3 major questions right now for the ESSER fundings and for the evaluation of the position for community coordinators, and most on the core services expenditure. Thank you.
Thank you. Chair Lentz, can we turn to you next for your initial thoughts, concerns, questions?
Yeah, I think much like many of the things that have already been said, I think I think that this is a really good budget given the circumstances that we are in right now, but my stomach is still in knots about next year. And just like Vice Chair Bondo said, like some of those really important roles like Make It Happen and other things that we're moving to ESSERF, like I'm really losing sleep around that. And I know that we have a plan to kind of like think about that and get really intentional, but I think that is just such a big indicator of how under-supported we are, that we're having to move these like crucial services into this unsustainable fund. And I think what a tremendous loss to our community to have that instability there. And then I just, in terms of specific questions that haven't been mentioned, I was hoping superintendents could go a little bit more into what the non-salary 5% cut is, like what that actually looks like on the ground level. I'm assuming the administrators in each school make those decisions, but just kind of like more examples of what that funding pays for.
Board Member Grant, thank you for joining us. Would you like to share any thoughts?
So Board Member Grant should just, you're here as an observer, right?
Yeah, I just want to be clear. I'm not on the committee, and everyone knows my role is somewhat circumscribed. But what I'm really here to do is kind of issue spotting around what we can advocate for from Augusta. I'm sort of staying in touch with Representative Brennan and just figuring out what are some buttons that can be pushed there. So I don't have anything else to add. I don't think I should, but I just want you to know that that's what I'm listening for. What are the ways, what are the areas where we could argue for something greater from the state? So I think I'll just leave it at that.
Thank you. Thank you. Vice Chair Bondo, you have your hand raised. Go ahead.
Thank you. I just found out, and I got 2 more bullets that I didn't talk about it. So when I look at it, some of the items. So I had a question. I saw we have 9 coaches. Then we try to see. So I try to understand. Just having some perspective to see if we need to have 9 coaches. And one thing is that, and I think we bringing the notion of new arrival, new students. I get it. We have, and that's exactly what I've been asking all the time, to try to get me to understand how many has moved out of the district, because I'm thinking about the class size. Do we have capacity to have those students in our building? This is the main concern, because we can add FTs and all the support we need to increase size classes that we already have overcrowded. And where are those students they will go to? Which specific schools they will be able to attend? And if we have a capacity to have those students in our building. So if we can have a figure to see how many students have moved out, so we can balance the new arrival and the capacity in our building. If we need to add some more classes and having some more teachers, that's why I want to have some clarification on that. Thank you.
Thank you. Board Member Opperman, go ahead.
I'm going to be pretty harsh right now, and it's just to make sure that because we all have priorities and they generally align. But I think as it would be easy, I would appreciate knowing which expenditures and how much of those expenditures are mandated by state and federal. And I know it looks like a very good budget, but the comments about the cliff next year, I wonder about looking at a smaller percentage of increase. What would a 6% increase look like? What would a 5% increase look like? Sounds harsh, but I honestly think to get a perspective, because next year, I don't know what's going to happen. And commenting what Member Figdor, Member Bryden, Member Lentz, all said, the moving things to SSERF is a very quick Band-Aid, and it would be more responsible to look seriously. And I like the budget as it looks, but I think we have to do that. Thank you. So I would like a 5% and a 6% budget, much like they do at the city.
Thank you for that. Board Member Figdor, go ahead.
I had one piece of information that I'd love, if not today, probably not today, but for the future meetings, which is I know one of the additional challenges that is playing into this budget is the loss of some grant fundraising, some core grants. And I'm wondering if we could see a summary of kind of major grants and what what grants we're losing, and then if there's if there's a projection or anticipation of new additional grants or of continuing grants, just so we can look at we have a lot of foundations that are very generous in supporting our work and helping to understand how their resources play into our budget and into our trajectory moving forward is a piece of information that would be helpful to me.
Thank you. I'm going to go to Board Member Opperman, and then we're going to take a pause and check in with the co-interim superintendents. This has been kind of a lot. I want to, but go ahead. Yeah, go ahead, Julie.
Thank you, but I'm going to hold. I forgot to hang up.
Okay.
Sorry.
Okay.
Okay.
Sure thing. Okay. So I want to acknowledge that this has been sort of a wall of rapid fire thoughts and questions, I want to take a pause. Aaron and Malia, give you an opportunity to address anything that came up that you feel like you want to, just speak to quickly, identify things that you would want to return to in another meeting, those sorts of reactions, if you'd care to do that.
Sure. Aaron, I can start. Do you want? Is it okay? Well, I appreciate people acknowledging the amount of work that went into the budget, especially given the circumstances of this year and the loss of capacity around the budget with the transition. So, I feel just a huge appreciation for the team who did a ton of work, and want to call out Gail and Miranda in particular for their incredible just work, insight, wisdom, and care that they brought to this process. So I just wanted to appreciate you all for seeing that and naming that and echo that sentiment as well. I think that I think a lot of the questions you're asking, to do them justice, like we said at the next finance committee, this is a lot of work to pull together the data that you're asking for. But I think a lot of that we can do. I think my biggest reaction to hearing you all is that it will be important and helpful to get clarity on where you want to land in the local budget as far as the amount. We share your concern over ESSER. The reason we're doing it is because we are mindful of the tax burden. And so that will be something that we're trying to get clear from you on is you want smaller class sizes or you want certain programs or things that added, that's just adding to the budget. And then you're concerned about the cliff, as are we. So that would either add to the budget or we just cut those things now. And so at the end of the day, there's no easy path here. And so our thinking on ESSER was that we have it. And so rather than to cut things now and let the money sit, that it would behoove us to leverage that money while encouraging you all along with us to pursue these larger structural changes. We can't paper cut our way to where we need to be. At this point, it's big programmatic changes and loss of programming, changes to the structure of schools' class sizes to get, way down on the tax side of things. So really we're buying time. If I were to sum up the ESSER strategy for some of those larger structural things to start to happen. So it's our full intention and goal that we don't lose what's in there. But we figured let's give you all and us time to work toward some of the bigger shifts rather than to cut things now and to have that money sitting there. I want to remind folks that you can't just use it for anything. You have to use ESSER for things that are allowable based on its intent and our application, which kind of sums up to learning acceleration and the mental and behavioral health supports as part of the recovery from the pandemic, which, as we pointed out, is a difference from, for example, where the city is, because our recovery is long-term and ongoing. It is not ending, obviously, after next year, as far as the impacts to learning gaps and mental and behavioral health. So I would just kind of put that out there as well. And then, I'll pass. I mean, a lot of this, absolutely, we can follow up on the specifics. We could go through some of it now, but I think a lot of it is some data that you'll want us to pull together. So those are my initial reflections based on what you all are sharing and asking about. So, Aaron, if you want to jump in.
Thanks so much. Yeah, I was just going to say, Board Member Opperman, I see you, but I'm going to make sure that Aaron has a chance.
That's fine.
Okay, just making sure. Go ahead.
Yeah, Malia said much well there. So, I think the whole, kind of bucket of a discussion around ESSER, class size, what's moving, I can imagine how we can frame up that conversation for Monday. So that feels certainly a rich opportunity to dive in. And certainly, as we named, part of our goal of this budget process is to be thinking about not just FY24, but FY24, 25 and beyond. So appreciate those those concerns. We, met that objective of sparking that conversation, so that's good. And I appreciate Board Member Figdor's questions around just clarifying and understanding kind of the investments on that side. I can envision how we can kind of come back and clarify, exactly those structures and the investments to address, kind of what the core issues we're seeing both from payroll and the audit. So we're kind of being mindful of both of those pieces in terms of investments, as it, in terms of the positions that we were proposing. So, and then, yeah, I think that's about it. I saw, some of those themes. So I appreciate kind of the feedback here around the themes and what it may mean. And I think, to Board Member Opperman's last question around, getting real. And I think this is part of what we'll grapple with as we move through this process. Like, okay, if we just increased by, 5%, in a dollar figure, what does that mean? And I think, we're going to have to get pretty clear about that for both this budget. I know we could be ready as part of the conversation next time with kind of projections, obviously super duper early, but just knowing what the valuation number was that came in this year, right? What will kind of the scale of what we need to be being mindful of for next year in terms of total dollars, and what some of these kind of structural moves are that we keep talking about, which will be familiar things. I mean, this is the challenge. There's not some new, brand new creative thing. We're talking about elementary reconfiguration, class size, the middle school model, those kinds of issues are the places, unfortunately, when we're talking about the scale of dollars. But I think, I can imagine quantifying that for us so that we can grapple with that being helpful to start to get kind of really real. And obviously those will be very initial projections, but I think having some sense of what we're trying to be prepared for will be helpful for us as we move through this conversation. So, thank you all. Appreciate it.
Board Member Opperman, go ahead.
Thank you, Superintendents. I appreciate very much what you're headed into trying to do for us so we can make good decisions. And I guess I'm looking at the piece of information that talks about enrollment-based adjustments and ESSER funding. And I mean, what's moving into ESSER funding are classroom teachers and math coaches and the like, if I'm correct in that. And there is enrollment adjustments, losses of classroom teachers at the elementary school level. I just don't know if I'm reading this correctly. So loss of classroom teachers in the elementary level and reallocations to ESSER funding and adding or maintaining teachers at the high school level. I don't know. It's page 15. I don't know what. This is an ignorance on my part on, where you want I know parentheses means loss, but I'm trying to figure out what the loss is as it's written. So maybe Miranda can tell me what I'm doing if you want.
Member Opperman, quickly, but can you say what page you're looking at?
Page 15. Page 15. Staff proposals. Proposal changes for FY20. It's kind of a summary page. It says enrollment-based adjustments, investments, reductions, and then reallocations to ESSER. And the reallocations are all listed as losses. And so...
Right. So this is... Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt.
Thank you. No, please, you know me, I'm trying to figure this out.
Yeah, so you're right that the parentheses are reductions, the non-parentheses are adds. So this is a local budget only. So it's not showing where those positions have landed in ESSER. So the reduction to the local budget is a reduction of 16.5 FTEs. But all of the ones that are in that bottom section, reallocations to ESSER, are then funded on ESSER.
So they're added back in by referring.
That's right, but that's not reflected here simply because this is a local budget document.
So that would be a good measure of if we didn't have ESSER next year, that's where we would have to add positions and all. Okay. And then under investments, it looks like it largely that is support staff, support, core make the system work stuff, which is from audit. Largely, some of that is from audit. So is that a correct understanding?
Yes. I mean, it's not only the audit stuff. There's a lot of intake, the multilingual positions. We're also added to local as well as a couple of custodians.
Okay, good. That was my question for right now. Thank you.
Okay.
I'll lower my hand.
Chair Lentz, go ahead.
Thank you. Just a couple of questions. One, am I right in thinking that a percentage up or down on the budget is about $1 million in terms of what gets cut or what gets added? Is that correct?
A percentage to the tax rate, yes.
Yes, thank you. Thank you. So let's keep that in mind when we're talking about moving our tax rate. It's $1 million for every percentage point. And then I was just hoping at a future meeting that we could look at our fund balance / reserves and kind of like, what is that amount? And if you've had any thinking about a long-term plan around that, I'd love to get a little bit more granular with that. Thank you.
Thank you. Board Member Figdor, go ahead.
Yeah, agreed with Chair Lentz on the fund balance details. The other thing I just wanted to flag for the new board members in case you haven't seen it, but our staff do an amazing job of writing narratives about the investments. And so they're at the end of the budget book. I'm just looking right now. They start on page 26 of the PDF. So I just encourage folks to read through those as a great resource that provides real rich detail about the proposed investments.
Thank you. I have a question. As we've been talking this through, I realized the topic of grants came up, and if this is something that we need to talk about in another meeting, that's fine. But if it's something that we can answer or talk a little bit about right now, that'd be super. I'd like more information and understanding on when we talk about grants. Obviously, that's some federal grants and things like that. I'm curious to get more clarity on how the Foundation for Portland Public Schools grant funding interacts with the local budget that we're talking about. Is that something that you could give that one of the co-interim superintendents could give a quick summary on?
I can start, and then we could follow up when we pull together information pertaining to the grant question that was previously asked. We could also give you the data on how much the foundation is contributing. As you know, Andy comes and reports that out to you on a quarterly basis, so we can get the last quarterly report from her and just pull that back out for you all. But basically, the executive director, Andy, sits on the cabinet, and that's intentional because it means that she's very grounded in the district priorities and context, which positions her to, raise money in support of the priorities and to advocate for that work. So I appreciate the way she and the foundation have really made an effort to have some things that they do that are their kind of vision, such as like the teacher grants. And that's like a program that they really have done for a while that's highly valued, but that they're also trying to balance that with funding things for the district that are aligned to the core strategy. An example would be the foundation is the key to enabling our mobile makerspace. They basically raised the money to create the whole thing and got the funding for the position for 1 year. Another example is they've put a significant contribution into Wabanaki Studies, funding the film, which is many hundreds of thousands of dollars, as well as lots of stipends. So they tend to do a lot of support for some of the things that I would describe in our innovation phase to help us move those things forward. But we could get Andy's report on that, and Gail, feel free to jump in, or Aaron, if you want to share anything else on that.
Yeah, I mean, just a clarity, they, to add to what Malia was saying, they pursue kind of private, sources of funding. So any federal funding is stuff that, Gail leads, or, our grant manager, Kate Hersom. So those are things that happen internally, and they don't carry, directly in their budget and through their own fundraising, positions for us. There are some that they've been able to raise grants that are, separate and aside, that aren't carried within the foundation, the mobile maker for kind of time limited things. But I think they're generally pretty limited in terms of, that. So it's, as Malia said, kind of complementary, and in those spaces to help kind of spur kind of innovation, to help tee up and establish, to then kind of ideally incorporate over time. But obviously with the revenue picture, that makes it more challenging.
So when we're talking in this conversation about grants, we're talking about separate. So there's foundation over here, and what we're talking about here, never the twain shall meet. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, and we can, in the budget form and in context building documents, we have some slides that show you all that wheel of the percent of our budget that are broken down by local and the grants. So we can pull that back up. Yeah. And just a reminder, on the federal grant side, there's always parameters. So again, it's not just like money we can use however we see fit. There is specific criteria for what's considered as their terminology is allowable.
And I'll just add on the federal grant side of things that's lagging. So that's the trick in the budget process. So on the title side of things, we don't have our allocations yet for next year, nor do we have any indication from the state whether we'll be level funded, increased, or decreased. And so it's a gamble, and our grant is due on August 1st. So we don't even know if things are allowable officially until September. So we're making a decision. If we don't put things in local that we want to guarantee, it's a risk, right? That we will lose them. And, that it's hard to know the climate. We could experience a reduction in our federal grants as well.
It's not good to hear, but that's helpful context. Thank you, Gail, for sharing that additional detail. I am curious about whether co-interim superintendents, you would feel comfortable just with a quick response or summary response again to one of the thoughts that I flagged earlier around when something is in the local budget, is that, to what extent does that get reviewed in terms of potentially continuing on versus, okay, it's in the local, so it's locked in forever. Obviously it's a continuum, and I wouldn't expect that we would be on either end of that continuum, but is that something that you feel comfortable speaking to for a minute?
Yeah, I can start, and I will give the example of the academics team, and then Erin, maybe you could give an example from a school budget or an operations one. So we go line by line with our local budget. So what Gail does with the directors is we take this year's budget. We have a spreadsheet. We could even just show you as like just visually get a sense. And so for every single line in our budget, we have a column where we have the amount. We know what, if it's sort of assumed, the new quote would be, right, from inflation. And then directors indicate what they intend to continue, reduce, eliminate, or reallocate, or then at the bottom we put add. So every single line we scrutinize with that reduce, add, eliminate, reallocate, whatever I just said. You get the gist. And so from there, we then have a lot of conversations about prioritization. We also have a column in that spreadsheet where we tier things so that we know for anything we're adding, sort of whole stop or increasing, that's what I meant, increase and add, that all of those things are tiered. And then we also are looking at reallocation. So we might say we've had, certain literacy things we're going to eliminate this line. We're going to reallocate toward this other thing that serves a similar purpose. So yes, is my answer to you, that we do that with great detail and with that kind of schema, if you will, for how we evaluate those lines. I will say, I don't think every department, we don't have a methodology like that that's consistent across every single department. And so, I would name that. But Erin, if you want to give an operations or a school-based example, that might help to sort of see the range of how people approach it. But yes, we're scrutinizing the lines.
Yeah. I mean, I think as well, just would name, that we did identify, almost, $750,000 of current locally funded things for reductions. So, that came out of a process of reflection and engagement, specifically with our school leadership team. And those are, challenging, as we talked about specifically, the community coordinator positions, which has come up, and we'll provide detail around that. We can get the specifics. Just kind of a breakdown, just to answer Board Member Vice Chair Bondo's question super briefly on that. They're very fractional FTE. I don't know the total number of people it represents, but they are really spread out and kind of touch each of our schools. They're like 0.2 at a given school, and one person will have a little fractional FTE at multiple schools that they support. So we'll get that detail so you can see, but they really are serving kind of all of our schools, just broken up into little tiny, bits of time. So I just recognize that that was how we got to that, was by reflections on what's in the local. This year, Miranda and I looked at an analysis of kind of all budgets, and particularly non-personnel, in terms of where it stood in terms of end of the year actuals from FY22. Obviously, we're in the middle of FY23, so it was hard to do the comparison on what was projected and kind of requested to see where there were spaces for inefficiencies or potential reductions. So that was a process we went through, looking across all of the departments and budgets. I think, it's challenging just, as we'll bring forward, I think, in this conversation about, about how to manage moving ahead in FY25, where these kind of, quote unquote, like legacy kind of programs are, and what needs to be considered, I guess that was really, that was the pandemic year. As we transitioned into the pandemic, we're having that conversation about, identifying some, I think it was City Councilor Rodriguez actually spoke to this in one of the conversations that we had around kind of this quadrant activity that we did. That was a prioritization activity. And I think that's part of what we, may need to engage in at some level here, as we start to think about how do we utilize the ESSER funding for this year, and with the recognition of the gaps we're going to be potentially experiencing next year. So those kinds of things that'll, get put on the table there again are, just some of the, what I think many people would consider, core, as we've been saying, as the city has been saying, is in the eye of the beholder. But the kinds of things that get named there are, as we said, kind of like, elementary class size, middle school model, athletics and co-curriculars is one, that will get named there. We have some of this, additional programming that we think is really valuable. I think our highlighting of all the Portland Promise investments are, again, our attempt to, kind of review what are the strategic important investments we're trying to preserve, and recognizing some of them, are, moved into ESSER for this coming year. But again, that kind of connects to the priorities of what we can utilize that ESSER funding for, so that they, we couldn't use the ESSER funding for the special ed out of district tuition costs, right? That's not an allowable expense there. And so that was such a significant expense. We needed to find, a commiserate number of dollars to move into the budget. And so while we view them as core services, the math coaching, we talked about the gains in math, or those elementary class size in high school positions. Those are, from a perspective, at least from the federal perspective, additional resources to be able to kind of address, both the learning acceleration as well as the mental and behavioral health, kind of supports. So, we can kind of outline some of those categories, but that's part of how we think about it.
Yeah, appreciate that. Thank you. Board Member Figdor, I see you have your hand up. Go ahead.
I had another request in terms of additional information. It's just current analysis of our debt service and then looking out into the future. As far as I remember, we are carrying both the BFOF additional debt and the pension obligation bonds this year and next year. And then the pension obligation bonds essentially we're finished having to deal with for FY26. So it'd be helpful to have that as we're be able to look at those numbers as we're looking ahead and understanding how this budget positions us for the future. And then I don't know to what extent as part of this budget process we're going to get into looking at potential big structural changes that might be needed for next year and the future. But I would like to add looking at the high school re-envisioning, and I think the timelines aren't going to align. But if we are able to get state funding to build a 21st century high school that included adult ed and PAS, how might that affect the overall budget? And then two, the other piece I would like to consider when we get to that conversation is looking at our extracurricular programs as well. If we're going to have to make major cuts and reconsider how we're providing education in Portland, then I think our extracurricular should be part of that analysis as well. And then I had just one really specific question, and that is I saw that the equity leaders stipends were proposing ending those. And so I'd like to understand why, or if we're paying for those positions using the bundles, which I don't think is the case. So.
I mean, I could answer that quick if that.
Go right ahead. Yeah.
We're proposing ending them. No, we don't want to. We don't want to cut anything we're cutting. I just want to continue to make that very clear. And so the rationale is that they were ESSER funded. And so we, in needing to try to preserve some of the core services by pushing them into ESSER, have had to take a lot of things off there. Holistically, we are investing in stipends. And so there's opportunity for schools to look at their bundles as school leadership and be thinking about sort of how am I using this for the leadership team and sort of, is there an ESOL rep? Is there a special ed rep? Is there somebody who's sort of connected to the equity leaders team? Like, I think we can think creatively about that. So our, we're retaining stipend money for schools and prioritizing the methodology to ensure that every grade span in school has those in place over some of these other kind of specific episodic stipends we've had when we haven't had that consistent methodology in place. So that's the rationale, but there's certainly a loss in terms of everything that is coming out.
Thank you. And also to follow up on what Board Member Figdor was asking in terms of more information about debt service, and I forget if it was the presentation or the budget book document, but I saw a reference to debt service for Cumberland Avenue. So I'd appreciate just a better understanding of what that is. Board Member Opperman, you have your hand up. Go ahead.
A couple questions and thoughts. One has to do with the role of DHHS and the funding from DHHS for the needs of our students. And and I'm thinking of, I know there's specific needs for specific groups of those under SPED, but is it possible to be broader? And again, I don't know this, and to be considered to talk to DHHS or to work on that process, so that some of the social work expenses are part of that, because that to me is in that piece also, in collaboration with entering new Mainers and all, and looking at, you know, how much that particular department is doing an exceptionally fabulous job at helping these people work the system. But it seems to me that is also something that the state might be doing and participating in, with funding for individuals or for providing individuals that would collaborate with the schools. And that was one of my concerns. And there was another one, but I'll let it go right now. So those are things that I'd like to find out about.
Sure. Go ahead, Aaron.
Yeah, I think, I mean, definitely here, you know, kind of one theme that we can report back on in the debt service fund balance. I think that's all a conversation. I think we can be prepared to speak through that. Miranda in particular, she's definitely thought about the multi-year plan, and there was, you know, a couple of questions, I think, that began to dig into that at the budget forum when that conversation came up. But I think specifically, Sarah, this may be a quicker response that feeds into that broader question that we'll need to come back and prepare for. But 353 Cumberland Ave, and Miranda, if you can weigh in, you know, we had, as a potential cost savings move, had gone through a process to explore moving out, like selling that building. And this will be, you know, I mean, you know, the changing questions about valuation is still a question, right? But we went through a process to kind of evaluate. So at one point, we anticipated moving out of, you know, those offices on 353, and correct me, team, if I'm remembering correctly, like, I think the initial projection would be we weren't there right now. We went through a process to have not been there, but through it, and we had the support. So we moved the debt service for that out of the local budget as a budget move in a prior year, in anticipation of selling that property. As we went through that process, it was determined that we would not you know, be able to save money on an ongoing kind of revenue basis because of the challenges of being, you know, relocated, the needs to still maintain some level of kind of presence, you know, front office presence, obviously the intake work, and, you know, for a variety of other kind of essential, you know, just kind of street level visibility where people can access, as opposed to just being embedded in, you know, we had plans engaged. We're looking in classrooms across the district of where different departments could go. But ultimately it was determined that that was not going to, you know, have an, you know, kind of impact compared to the debt service costs, you know, for maintaining that, just in part because of the costs of the other additional spaces where we would need to still have some kind of front of house presence. So, so that's why it's kind of coming back to the local budget at this point. So that's a little bit of that story. We can wrap in, you know, those costs as part of the other various kind of debt service issues. As we look at the combination of debt service and fund balance. But I don't know if, Miranda, you want to say anything more there? Or?
Yeah, just one item of clarity. So we sort of like preemptively moved it out of the budget a couple of years ago. It was part of this plan with respect to the custodians. So the custodians are budgeted, but they were paid for from ESSER these last couple of years, which was intended to help us build fund balance, right? So we still had to pay for the debt service because we have not moved out of Cumberland Ave, right? But we did so by essentially, we didn't cut the debt service out of the budget. We just cut that part of the custodian piece out, sort of. So it wasn't a 1-for-1. We cut it out in principle by reducing our budget for custodians, expecting that by the time we had to add back the custodians, we'd be able to not have to add back that debt service. So it wasn't exactly straightforward, but yeah, it was like a preemptive cut. And so in the meantime, we paid for it from that custodian surplus that was being charged to ESSER in some. If that makes sense, or if that just confused everybody more, I don't know, but that's how it worked until now, because we obviously have continued to pay that debt service. this whole
I
time.
think it makes sense. I would be not in this conversation. I understand that, but I would be interested in getting more detail around potential revenue from a potential sale, like what the challenges would be, what the carrying costs are of having that building. That sort of data would be really helpful for me in a future conversation. Board Member Youssef, go ahead.
Thank you. Very quick question about the ATP hiring cost. Is that one time, or that is what is gonna cost us for the duration of coming years? And what is the difference between what we had before as a payroll cost and now?
You mean the ADP costs is what you're referring to, Board Member Youssef?
Yes.
What is currently in the budget is actually just a half year of kind of the annual costs that it will be, because their year goes January to December, right? And our fiscal year, is kind of carrying for half of that year. So I think as we, to Board Member Figdor's earlier questions about the investments in HR, finance, and payroll can bring back kind of a projection of what those, what's being proposed for this year and what some of those ongoing costs are, because that's part of what's factoring into our thinking there, at least initially. So, but what's currently in the proposed budget is, for, to get us through for the first year of kind of service. But we'll bring back what the ongoing annual costs are related to that.
Thank you, so.
Great question. I also have a question that we could possibly have a quick high-level conversation about now, if that's possible, or potentially and have a more in-depth conversation in a later meeting. But I'd be curious to better understand for the summer school cost, the $900,000 proposed. I'd like to get a better understanding of what that would get us that we would not have had in one of the previous years where the spend was about $300,000. What's the distinction in terms of what we would get for that additional $600,000?
I can't give that analysis from a comparative basis, but we could give you kind of a high level sense of what we did when we had 300,000 and what's approximately proposed for this summer. I mean, just to be clear though, the team's been waiting to know what their budget is. And so we haven't planned exactly the scope and scale for the summer because we've been signaling it's going to be less, it's going to be less. We just created transparency into this 900 amount with the caveat that you all haven't, this isn't actually the budget yet. So precision in your analysis is not possible because we're waiting on this to have clarity to be able to plan. But we can give you an approximate sense at some high level.
Super. That's great. And just for context, where I'm coming from with that question is recalling back to the board. I think it was a workshop that we did about summer, and just recalling some of the discussion about how great it is to be able to help kids over the summer, but also the trade-offs and staff burnout and things like that. So just wanting to be super intentional about how we're using those funds. If there's a way to, use some of those funds instead to keep our community coordinators or something along those lines is where I'm coming from at a high level, theoretically. Go ahead.
Well, I'll just say one thing totally. That is definitely, I mean, as you can see, we went to that as a go-to. We actually had it at a higher level, a lower, we kept going back to that, as potentially like a nice to have as vis-a-vis the core services. But I'll just say quickly for the K through 8, the strategy is all outsourcing to community partners. So for whatever that means to you, just as a sort of preview, but we can talk more on Monday.
Okay. So the staff burnout component would not be.
I mean, there's still going to be the high school piece. There's a credit intensive piece. So we need our own staff for that. But for the K through 8, it would be a significantly reduced staff ask. Staff members could apply to work for the community partners if that's something they wanted to do, but we would not be running massive hiring and payroll and all that for summer staff like we did the last 2 years. Nor would it be on us to have to recruit outside of some like coordination.
That's helpful context. I appreciate that. Board Member Opperman, go ahead.
I have two things, one that I remembered and one that your discussion just brought up. In summertime, when we're outsourcing it, what is the nature of the programming? Is it academic largely? Is it largely social adjustment type stuff? Is it related to English language learning? How intense is it in those partners? Answer that one, and then I'll ask your other question.
Yeah, I mean, again, we're still last year. Basically, the emerging strategy for elementary this year is to work with 4 kind of larger partners, which would be the Learning Works, Boys and Girls Club, YMCA, and REC. Learning Works definitely has an academic element because it's part of the grant that they received to run the programming. But really, it's more, our assumption is that the programming is really more for social emotional learning. And the other element that we were going to incorporate is what high dosage tutoring, where we would be working with partners to have them carve out a portion of the day for tutoring, and that there would be sort of an element on our end for the devices component, especially where it's some remote tutoring. That potentially is getting backed off as we were continuing to shave off the budget. So it's a choice point. But for middle school, we'd definitely be using the tutoring for the academics. And then the partners are really social emotional learning. They're more camps and things like that. So it's a mix, but this year's strategy would have less of the academic design because it's not we're not designing it, we're outsourcing it. And then we're trying to infuse some tutoring. And then pertaining to the language development, part of our key consideration would be around the tutoring structure that supports students with English language acquisition. So again, question mark on resources, scope, and scale. At the high school level, we run credit recovery, but we have those intensives. And so the expectation would be that the 2 comprehensive schools for one of their intensives has a language intensive, which would be specifically around language development. And most likely they would hire one of their ESOL teachers to design that course and run it.
Okay, thank you. The other question is kind of follow up to what Vice Chair Bondo was asking, and it provokes some thought into as we do intake, as we help individuals come in and develop their skills. How many of those leave at what level and are we always working at a new group of students coming in with needing intensive language? I don't know. And that it would be interesting to know what kind of flow goes on with the system. I know people move up through the system and that's awesome. But are they leaving and we're getting different situations? So that's my follow up to Vice Chair Bondo's. So I don't know what you can tell me.
Are you going to go ahead, Aaron?
Well, no, yeah, I think I understand it as well with Vice Chair Bondo's question of kind of just, what is some of that mobility data in terms of, particularly the exit, I think we'll be able to try and bring back some data. I'll ask, our remaining data team person can help, give us a little bit of that. And I'll look we were part of a United Way funded study around that was kind of, I don't know that it'll be current enough, but around some regional mobility data as well. So I'll have to dig up that little report, but can share that. It may be a little dated at this point, but can be some background of what that looked like. So, one thing, just as we're continuing to talk, is just a little bit knowing we have finance. I'm starting to kind of process the themes and chunks of things. And I don't know if there's any input from the committee here, because recognizing we have public hearing and, finance committee meeting on Monday afternoon, early evening. And then we have board meeting on Tuesday, at which we kind of have, an expectation of some workshop time to talk about budget related questions as well. So, I'm starting to kind of think in my mind of like what'll be good for finance committee, what might be a good, topic for the budget workshop. Potentially it's like the whole ESSER, funding cliff, what are the structural things, just to have the chance to kind of bring along the full board versus, I think we can come back with the details about fund balance, debt service, so forth. So for example, I'm thinking that feels like an appropriate kind of follow up here in finance committee, but the kind of broader discussion and understanding building about the funding cliff might be a better suited as the workshop topic for Tuesday, evening. So, as we continue the discussion, just wondering if there's any input from the committee in that regard as we think about, when and where and in what venues.
Your initial thinking makes sense to me. Yep. I also have two more specific questions, curiosity questions that have occurred to me. Just to, again, not trying to put you on the spot, but first being, if you can answer like right off the top of your head, that's amazing, but that's not the expectation. First being, I'm curious about the crossing guard contract, how much that is and how it compares to the cost of having somebody just part of our staff, what the differentiation is there. The other thing that I saw that I just made a note of, I saw the additional FTE for a teacher at Casco Bay High School, and I'm curious to learn more about that, given the fact that like enrollment wouldn't be increasing, and just wanted to get more information about that as well.
I can speak to that second one, and I don't know if you want to offer any initial just thought about the crossing guard piece. I mean, there's definitely a story to tell with the crossing guard stuff in terms of where that contract's been, and where it stands now. But the Casco Bay one, just if, we can talk about it some in the context of, all of this class size conversation and, but Casco Bay, if you, kind of look at the FTE and enrollment projections and classroom staffing, is the only school that's been staffed under ratio. So they have maintained, for now a couple of years, 21.31 FTE, but the ratio projects when we apply the same formula that we do for the comprehensive high schools, it projects that they should, even just at a base level, they should have 23.5 FTE, and then adding the equity enhancement, that would get them to, let me look at my numbers here. That would get them to 26 FTE. So, they have a particular structure, that's worked, but, they have been essentially our most efficiently staffed school over time and well under ratio compared to all our other schools. So this was, an initial move to add a little additional capacity there, given how far under ratio they are, compared to our other schools.
Are we hearing that their existing ratio is causing challenges?
Yeah. Mm-hmm. They're just don't have some of the same flexibilities that, are built in the mod, with some of the, the other schools in terms of flexibility. So, the amount of, additional time that teachers have, they're essentially maxed out, in terms of their time. And from a, leadership perspective, it's, is just very lean, and taxing. So,
okay, thank you. Board Member Opperman, go ahead.
Thank you, Chair. Always many questions. I have two things. One related to you will be able to give us by Monday was I really would like to see some evidence of what in all of our budgeting is actually mandated and what percentages. I understand, how much you'd be cutting, but where you would do that, and if we went to 5 or 6%. And the second thing has to do with this the conversation on Casco Bay, and that is, do they have as much intensive need for ELL and the like compared to the two comprehensive high schools? That just a concern there that, a concern that they need the person, but are you judging them based on the other schools, is that real as far as special ed intense needs and ratios and the like? So those are my.
I can speak to this, but so and you may or may not recall this from the workshop when we shared the ratio methodology, but we have distinct methodology for classroom teachers, special education, and ESOL. So Aaron's explanation was for the classroom teachers. Then we apply the separate methodology that Carlos stepped you through for staffing ESOL. And then for special ed, Julie Kirby and I did this as well. So they do have fewer IELD students, so students needing intensive English language development services, but I think more proximate Cal students. But either way, they're getting staffing according to their specific number of multilingual learners. And the same is true for special education. One challenge for them is that they're the only high school site where we have no Breathe program. So we have the in-school Breathe in all 3 of our middle schools and our 2 comprehensive high schools. And they don't get any of those additional supports. And so that's a point of conversation we've been having with them and exploring potential creative reallocation with the resources we have. But again, to answer your question, they're getting the resources that are exactly approximate to the population they have, both the number of students and the student demographic.
Thank you. Board Member Youssef, go ahead.
Thank you, Chair. Quick question about the out of district special ed increase of 2 million. The projection that we are hoping as a reimbursement, is that amount, the 2 million will be 1.5, or that 500 is not included, the 2 million?
Miranda, do you want to speak to that? I think the answer is we're getting 500, but that leaves us still with the 1.5. But Miranda, can you just speak to the technicality of that?
Yep. So we put $2 million in the expense side of the budget, and it's like 1.65 plus 350 for transportation. And then we also put 500 in the revenue side of the budget. So it offsets, 500 of that total 2 million cost.
And I would just share, Member Youssef, that, and we could have Jesse Applegate provide more data on the specifics. But again, we have a very small number of students who we send out of district, especially and we speak to this in the narrative section of the budget book. But we have, I think, 2 students right now who have an extraordinarily costly program that we're obligated, and there's a whole complicated back history to it where the state's involved. But just acknowledging that that's a large part of the driver is not so much across the board, but a small handful of extremely high cost programs that, again, we're legally obligated to.
Thank you so much. Appreciate it.
Board Member Figdor, go ahead.
Yes, following up on that a little bit, I believe that we were in conversations with the state about special ed costs more holistically. And so I'm wondering if that conversation has been able to be continued and where it's at.
Yeah, I can speak to that right now. So what Member Figdor is referring to is we were kind of previewing kind of strategic design work we wanted to do this year, where we were looking at the fact that historically our operating assumption is that by running so many specialized programs in the district, it was better for students because it's more of the least restrictive environment, and it was more efficient financially as compared to sending students out of district. Last year, in the last couple of years, when we've been digging in more deeply on the specialized programs, we had started that with Breathe, but then we started 2 work groups for our Beach and Bridge program. You may or may not be familiar with that. There was a lot of concern and feedback from staff around if they were positioned with enough staff, et cetera. So we brought in external consultants to help us evaluate our model and our, both as far as our curriculum, but also our staffing. And essentially what we learned is that we are good as far as staffing these programs. We have a great ratio, but as we looked at that more closely, we started to see that the cost per student for, let's say, our Bridge or Beach program is very high. And when you send a student out of district, you get a portion of the money back, or there's like a cap to what you get back from the state. So we were like, wait a second, is this actually more expensive to have kids in district? That's still not the only reason why we would change things, right? We're obviously considering programmatic, least restrictive environment. But anyway, sorry, that's a lot of talking, but I just, for those who aren't familiar with what Member Figdor is mentioning, that led us down a path to want to look holistically at the design of our district programs. And so we have not moved that as far as we wanted to. I think I mentioned in our board update that our director of special programs, Chris McCarthy, just stepped down. He's been on episodic medical leave since last year. He said he was comfortable with transparency around that, both long COVID or COVID related things since last year, and then other health issues this year. So as a result, between the director whose work was going to be that strategic planning, along with the significant staffing challenges we've had this year, the administration of these programs has essentially been pure implementation reaction as compared to having time for the proactive strategic planning we had intended and hoped. So that is still on the docket. By Chris stepping down, we have some resources there where we're going to have him actually spend the rest of the spring working on that proposal and how we're in analysis. So I think we'll still have it by the end of this year, but the long story long is that we don't have what you're asking for now. And that's not baked into anything with this budget at this point.
Thank you. That all makes a lot of sense. And thank you so much for the update.
Miranda, did you want to just add any immediate context on the crossing guard question that might be helpful? Just trying to think about what are things we might be able to hit in the moment versus carrying over into subsequent conversations.
I'm not sure that I'm the best person to speak on the history or, what it would cost to do it in-house versus the contract, because there is a long history there. But in terms of what we're adding to the budget this year for the crossing guard contract that went up substantially, that's $140,000. I don't have the total contract on top of my head, but I think that's potentially worth talking a little bit more about on Monday, and I can get some more details for you. But that's the add is 140.
I appreciate in advance, thanks in advance for what we will learn on Monday. Board Member Opperman, go ahead.
Learning everything all the time. Based on Member Figdor's comments, are we so I can understand, currently we have in-house programs, specialized programs, and you are looking at figuring out how to outplace them so that we could have reimbursement of Maine Care?
No, we still, this is kind of I'm trying to think of it's a big, complicated topic, but basically we have programs. I'll take our beach program. So this is for students with autism, and it's a highly specialized program. We have essentially one-to-one ed tech for every student, plus teacher, plus a dedicated, I think they have their own PT or OT. And so we're looking at these programs to figure out, there's been a challenge with running them in our context, with the parameters of our contract, right? So some of these programs, like they need all sorts of things that have flexibility, including time for staff. Like let's take Breathe to debrief after school every day. But our ed techs end at a certain time and we can't do stuff like that. So some of the best practice for very specialized programming is challenging to do in district because of our constraints, including some of sort of the lack of flexibility within the contract. So we're looking at we're just questioning, is this the most effective, efficient way to meet our students' needs when providing a full continuum of services? It's still our intention to have the most restrictive self-contained setting available in district, but we're wondering, is there a small percent of students, a small uptick of kids who might benefit more from out-of-district specialized programming, and then our self-contained programming is adjusted slightly. So there's like a bigger model, but we're still planning to keep as many kids in district as possible in the least restrictive environment. We're just taking a big step back and questioning not just the financial model and is this most efficient, but also is this in fact serving our kids most effectively? And a lot of it we think is yes, but we're still feeling like it's time to ask that question because so much has bubbled up with these programs internally with staff. And then simultaneously, we're looking at really significant costs and just making sure all of this is done most efficiently and effectively. So we're not trying to move all the kids out of district. I wouldn't want people to have that take away from what I shared.
No, I just wondered if we were going to have more people come into district out of contract, as a... I doubt that, Julie. We have a very small percent who are getting, I think we're at 33 kids right now total or something. And I think I put in the narrative, like Lewiston has like 100 or something. So I think there's very few students that wind up out of district. I mean, we will look at that, but I guess my prediction would be that we wouldn't have a lot of kids that are currently out of district coming back in. But we do have maxed out our programs like beach and stuff like that. So there could be potential students that are out that could, if we have more space, but then we'd have to add, all those additional classrooms in. Just I'm not quite sure that that you understood what I was trying to get at, is that hiring individuals as come in as a group in-house, not leaving. I mean, to be less in isolating situations so that the students would still be within the district space, but that you would have more individuals coming from outside on a separate contract. So you're describing something a little bit different. I don't want to send kids out. That wouldn't be what I would want.
Yeah.
See if there was one way of is there any efficiency of having a contract that you will come in and this is what you will do in our space? And that was just my question. And, you're looking at lots of different things, but that would be one I was wondering about.
I'll just quickly say we do that in some cases and we're not always sure. It's like we call, for example, BHPs, so behavioral health professionals who we contract with and are often assigned as a one-on-one to a student. We actually converted a bunch of BHPs in our Breathe program to ed techs a while back because it was more efficient financially and because it enabled more flexibility for us with the use of our resources. So a challenge sometimes is if you go into a classroom, we frequently have several adults actually in our classrooms. And so the thing I'm constantly scratching my head on is kind of the use of our folks efficiently. So you might go in a classroom and there might be a teacher, a language ed tech, and a BHP, but people are sort of, okay, the BHP, I'm only working with the student. And so even though you see more adults in the classroom, it's not sort of supporting the whole class. And when we do those kinds of outside agencies, supports, we don't have the flexibility and control over using them in different ways. So anyway, again,
Okay,
complicated.
I get it. I get it. Thank you.
Yeah.
That was very, very helpful.
Okay.
Super. So much good conversation, just so much conversation. I really appreciate the back and forth on this. I'm mindful of the fact that while we have, 2 hours booked for this meeting, I'm also mindful of the fact that people have other things to do today. So, and it seems like the pace of questions has slowed down a little bit. Nobody has their hand up right now. But what I want to do next is sort of prepare to wrap up and see if there are any folks with remaining questions and they haven't just clicked on the raise hand button yet, because I want to be respectful of the fact that, if we can wrap up at 9:30 and allow everybody to move on and start the work of, gathering all this information, then we can certainly do that. There's no reason to stay on for 2 hours just because that's what we scheduled for. Is there anybody who has a question that they haven't yet voiced that they would like to voice? Okay.
Sorry, I have just one really
quick.
quick.
Yes, go ahead. Go ahead, Board Member Figdor.
I was interested in and I'm sorry I'm not sure this is appropriate to get into this level of detail, but it's a question on my mind, which is the reduction of 1 FTE as in terms of high school Portuguese teachers split between the two comprehensive high schools. Just wondering, given the increase in number of native Portuguese speakers in the district, how we're thinking about that.
Yeah, I asked Carlos about that because I also was like, wait a second. So those were world language teachers. One was actually ultimately converted into a 0.5 because we couldn't find and hire the person. So it's not even. And I think, so I think the bottom line is that we just have the 0.5 at Deering. It was always intended as a 1 year only. So what we did is we kind of backed out to the ratio. Okay, what should Deering have? What should Portland have? And went with that as sort of core service mentality. But I think we have a 0.5 that's at Deering. So I think from who's the person and what is their skill set, we'll very much want to retain them within the district. I think the goal was that we wanted to have people who are working on that intensive language development. And so I think Carlos and the team are aware of how do we retain the language skills of the people that we have, but it really was sort of a part of that broader strategy. And it wasn't even it wasn't actually even that we had the 0.5 Portuguese at Portland High because we couldn't find them. Aaron, is that right? Can you keep me honest on that? Does that match your recollection?
Yes. Yep. Yeah.
Okay.
They weren't able to staff. They were able to staff as somebody who's 0.5 at Deering, 0.5 Portuguese, 0.5 ed tech. So we've been able to have somebody in that way. But then, we're not able to find somebody to fill the 0.5 at Portland. Ultimately, repurpose that for the remainder of the year of some additional ESOL capacity, which now has kind of been calibrated moving forward with the ratios. And just to this broader prioritization, I mean, this shows up when we'll continue to show up of prioritize. I mean, this a conversation that is maybe proximally similar is the choice about investment in the language acquisition ed techs, right? And choosing not to in service of prioritizing the investments in the English language instruction pieces. And so these are just the real tensions and trade-offs because arguably students need all of that, right? Particularly our newest students who are trying to adapt to their environment. But we're facing a context where we have to make some of these choices.
I appreciate that. Thank you. Last call for questions. Go ahead, Board Member Offerman.
Not a question, just a huge thank you to everybody who's put this together. And we've just grilled you through, and I know that. And it's hard. I know how hard figuring out what stays and what doesn't stay, and how much detail it takes and how much, angst it takes. So I really appreciate everything you're doing and will do. And Just breathe. Thank you.
Couldn't say it better than that. So that's a great way to wrap up the meeting. And I am looking forward to our conversation on Monday, the 20th at 4:30 to continue to do this work together. Thank you so much, everybody. Have a great day.